I was sent a very early copy of the book, and I thought it was a wonderful story and very beautifully told. I tried to buy the rights to it, couldn't, because Scott Rudin and David Brown were far too quick for me, so they snapped it up. And then sometimes you don't get things on the first bounce, and I watched its progress really as it went to #1 in the bestsellers, and then won a Pulitzer Prize, and I thought, and I used to track it thinking, you know, I wonder what's happening to it, and then second bounce it came back to me, so I was very fortunate.
How he's captured that the grittiness and the despair of life in that lane in Limerick it means that he must have come from something like that. I don't know. I'm very interested how people in the film industry find that the authenticity which he found.
The most difficult thing was writing the screenplay. First of all, you know, Laura Jones had written the screenplay, and then I wrote my screenplay, and then most importantly, both of us, both Laura and myself, needed Frank's approval of it. You know, he was an English teacher for many years, so fortunately he was very encouraging. And I think once we had that, then I had the courage actually to make the film, knowing that I would be loyal and faithful to his book.
I was sent the script and I read it, and I kind of nervously thought, oh my God, it's another great big emotional upheaval role. And then I heard Alan Parker's name and read the book and thought, there is no other film to make, this is it. I mean, it's just such an extraordinary story.
Angela's Ashes came to me through my agency, obviously, and Alan Parker had contacted them with a view to seeing me for this part. I went to meet Alan, had read the screenplay beforehand, thought it was a wonderful piece of work. And then after that first hour's meeting, I went home, read the book after that, and just prayed that Alan would come back and knock on my door, which thankfully did.
And every day that we ever had a problem on the film with regards to someone asked me, you know, for a film director you get asked 150 questions every day. And the difference between a good film and a bad film is how many of those questions you get right. And if there ever was any area of doubt, I used to say to everybody, look at the script, look at the book, most importantly look at the book, because in the book all the clues are there with regards to what we should be doing.
I studied the accent, I went to Limerick, I took up smoking, but really our Bible was the book.
Is there any boy in this class who thinks he's perfect? If so, raise your hands. Is there any boy here now who has money galore to be spending on shoes? Raise your hands.
I went to the set twice, the day they started shooting, and they started in the schoolroom, and I was standing against the wall, and Alan Parker was not too happy about visitors, but since I wrote the book, he didn't mind. And Emily was there, standing against the wall with me and my wife, Ellen. And these kids came into the classroom, these urchins, and I was a 9-year-old, and the master was there with the stick, and I stood against the wall rigid. Oh, he's going to spot me, and then he's going to beat the shit out of me. So I stayed very quiet.
Alan Parker, he created this world that was so real and so vivid, and he just kind of dropped me and Bobby into it and let us grow and do our own thing. And he would just very occasionally come in and just change the direction slightly or suggest something, but it was very, very gentle, which was kind of a surprise from a man who is so kind of passionately strong about what he believes about everything, you know, in every other way. He had very, very high standards, and he was very, he's a real perfectionist.
Sometimes, you know, a film is, because it is organic, you think of things on your feet. Sometimes some of the best things you do happen spontaneously. Other times you think about it, you know, 3 months before you do it, and then you know, it works out sometimes.
You buy points for people you don't know who tell you're a grand man while your children are at home with their bellies stuck to their backbones. The dole is 19 shillings and the rent is 6, and that leaves 13 shillings to feed and clothe 5 people.
Well, Emily is a slimmer version of Angela, my mother, but Emily must have got inside my mother's larger frame. No matter how bad things were, she could always come up with a saucy line, and Emily has that feeling of despair and desperation but good humour.
God is good, you know.
God might be good for someone somewhere, but he hasn't been seen lately in the lanes of Limerick.
I've done emotional roles before, but this was it's very restrained. There's no kind of great third act aria where she lets it all out and is out there kind of screaming and shouting.
The performance of her in Breaking the Waves is so unique and special that you think to yourself, one day I'll work with that person, you know. So I kind of mentally, you know, put on a little notepad in the back of your head. And then the moment I read this, she was the very first person that I ever thought of doing it.
She's just the most extraordinary person. She's just extremely down to earth, intelligent, funny, and just a brilliant person to work with.
I think Emily Watson's undoubtedly the best I've worked with, male or female. She has a poise and she has a concentration which is amazing, amazing. Considering she's surrounded with children all the way through this film with them in her arms, she's so focused, and she has this incredible quality whereby she makes even the most pathetic of actions and of situations and scenarios somehow quite beautiful.
If I could work, I'd be in the English factories.
A factory's no place for a woman.
Sitting on your arse is no place for a man.
I think it's a very understated performance by Emily, in that I think that, you know, you have to bear in mind this is 50 years ago where women weren't quite so assertive as they might be now, and she didn't quite know how to deal with the situation. First of all, she was dealing with a big family. She's dealing with incredible tragedy within the family, losing so many of her children so early. 3 of her children she lost in a very short period of time, going from the United States where she'd moved, coming back to Limerick, and then the alcoholism of her husband and the uselessness of him with regards to looking after that family. She deals with all of that.
I have the Friday penny for you boys. You line up like soldiers now and promise to die for Ireland.
I don't want it. I don't want it either.
Bobby and I work in a very similar way, very kind of instinctive. We both decided on day one, we sort of had to talk about it, that because it was all children, you can't arrive on the set and think, oh, well, I'll find my way into this.
The most important thing for me was I did not want to make this guy the villain in this piece. This was very, very important to me. Yeah, he's guilty, but he's some of his guilt stems from his alcoholism.
Those Red Branch Knights! Those Fenian men! The glorious IRA! Up! Up! Up!
It's a difficult role, and when I met with Bobby Carlyle, we both thought that we didn't want to make him into the sort of stereotypical cliche, you know, wife-beating drunkard.
So I was trying to kind of walk a middle ground, because when I met with Frank McCourt and spoke about him, one of the first things he said was that he loved his father dearly. And I thought, how interesting. I mean, and none of the family ever had a bad word to say about the man. So that was the key for me right there. I thought, now's the time, I have to walk this middle ground here and show some kind of sympathetic side, because if these kids loved him as much as that, there must have been a reason for it.
I loved having my dad to myself in the morning. I loved his stories where motor cars and planes went underwater, submarines flew up in the air, and polar bears wrestled with elephants on the moon. He was the Holy Trinity, was my dad, with 3 people in him. The one in the morning with his tea and woodbines telling us the stories, the one who tried so hard to find work but never did, and the one who came home at night with the smell of whiskey on him.
My father came from a revolutionary family in the north of Ireland. He was in the old IRA. He had to be hustled out of Ireland on a cargo ship. He didn't belong in a family. He shouldn't have been married. He shouldn't have had 7 children. He should have been a gunman. He would have been happy if the fight had continued and he'd been sentenced to death and hanged. He would have been happy hanging from the end of a rope, singing.
And if you only knew how the lights are red.
Although the father behaves appallingly and deserts the family and you know, is a terrible man, Bobby has found absolutely the essence of what it was that gave Frank his sense of poetry and lyricism. It's beautiful.
Bless me, Father, for I have sinned. It's been a day since my last confession.
And what sins have you committed in a day, my son?
I overslept and I nearly missed my first communion. My hair stuck up like a Protestant's, and I threw up my first Holy Communion breakfast. Then my grandma says she has God in her backyard, and what shall she do?
Tell your grandma to wash it away with a little water.
Before I started, I knew that the casting the 3 boys was going to be the most difficult thing to do. And so we saw about 15,000 kids, I think, all over Ireland.
I just saw the advertisement on the paper and where I went in, read my lines and went home. And a few weeks later I was called up again, and then around a week later I I found out that I got part.
What happened is that I cast Kieran first and middle Frank, because at that moment in the screenplay, he had the lion's share of work to do. So having chosen him, I then went down to young Frank, and then finally Michael Legg for older Frank was the third choice.
The three boys that play me are extraordinary. I think they were selected from thousands of kids who auditioned. So it just goes to show you again the genius of the people involved in the casting, and then Alan Parker being able to direct them like that.
Well, I think this fella likes me. It's Al Jolson he thinks I am. I think we'll keep this little fella.
No, he's our brother. That's you, Jim. You can't keep him.
The big problem having three actors play the same part is that you invest so much in, say, in the young boy, and then suddenly you see the middle boy and you go, oh, he's not in the film anymore, but I really love him. And so to make that seamless was quite important. And I constructed the voiceover to be able to deal with it, and then I needed some visual transitions that I thought would be effective.
I'm glad I did the first communion. I'm glad I got my first confession over and done with. Now I'm free to grow up. Old enough to be 10 anyway. Old enough to pay the ultimate penance for growing up.
I fell in love with all the kids, you know. I mean, they were fantastic. Alan did a great job on them. They were wonderful little performers as well.
They were bright, funny, naughty kids, in the way that Irish kids are, and very, very entertaining.
The doctor said it was the worst case of conjunctivitis he'd ever seen.
How long will you be in, Doctor?
Only God knows that, woman. I should have seen this child months ago.
There were contact lenses in my eyes, and they were from the top of the pupil to the bottom of the pupil. It was quite annoying with them in your eyes, because they might be rubbing against it and you might feel a bit of an itch, but you couldn't scratch it because it might be dangerous to scratch it.
I had to carry babies sort of nearly in every scene, and it was very tiring, but they were very sweet and very trusting and innocent. They're innocent in a way that English and American kids aren't.
Did you empty the chamber pot today?
I'm sorry, I forgot. He couldn't do it.
Shut up, woman.
It was his last day at school and he had to go to the doctors for his eyes.
Oh, shut up, woman!
You can't tell us to shut up. You're not our father.
My mother hated uncovering the past. She would still hate the uncovering of the past. Particularly, there's a scene there where she goes to bed with her cousin, which she had to do to save us. Otherwise, we would have been out in the street. But generally, she was against any exposure of the past, particularly since it dealt with poverty. And nobody of her generation, or even of my generation, was proud of coming from a slum.
They don't want the boys from the lanes at the altar. They don't want the ones with the scabby knees and their asses hanging out of the trousers. They want the boys with the nice shoes and the clean hair, and the fathers with the steady jobs. Not useless like you.
I think the most emotional scene for me is when Aunt Aggie, who has been pretty horrible to Frank throughout the film, finally buys him a new suit for his new job at the post office.
But you're going to need a new shirt. And shoes, not boots. Shoes. God, you look so smart, people will think you've robbed a bank.
That's the moment in the film where I always, a little tear appears. Having seen it 50 times, it's pretty hard.
Well, my favourite scene is the one that's most painful for me, and that's when I came home after having my first pint and slapped my mother in the face.
Lyman Griffin, open the loft with Lyman Griffin. Squeak, squeak, squeak. With fat Lyman Griffin rolling on top of you. Shut up! You fucking shut up, you slut!
That's my favourite scene because that's the one that shook me.
I think that was the hardest scene to do. Firstly, to play drunk and not make it look false, it was a bit worry for me. As it culminates in the slap at the end, that was really tough to do.
I'm very fond of the leaving scene because it was there's many different ways of playing that scene. But Emily and myself kind of got together and decided that the best way to play this was absolutely flat and just leave.
You be good boys, eh? Say your prayers and obey your mother.
All right. I think he actually tried to make it back to the States. I don't know how successful he was in that, but he did end up in Belfast, where he lived out the rest of his life. He lived till he was maybe 70 or 71 years old and gave up the alcohol in the last year of his life.
It was only the beginning for Frankie McCourt. He'll be back in a few years with a new suit and fat in his bones like any Yank. And a lovely girl with pearly white teeth and her hanging from his arm.
I know, Pa.
The very end, after the eclipse, and the family are all gone back inside, and Frank's at the door, and he just turns and he looks back down the lane, and he sees his two younger incarnations looking back at him. When we shot that, I found it incredibly moving.
We throw our talented children onto the dung heap. If this is the end of school for you, you must get out of this country, boys, and go to America. McCourt, do you hear me?
I do, sir.
Writing a memoir and then seeing it put on the screen, as I have, and it's a mystical experience.
It's very much a child's point of view of the world, despite the terrible circumstances. You know, things are funny.
Because sometimes in the most awful of circumstances, you got to laugh. If you don't laugh, you're going to cry. And you don't cry because that's a sign of weakness.
You're never to let anybody slam the door in your face again. Do you hear me?